So, John, I wanted to start off with you on that note and kind of take a step back and look at this from sort of a big picture perspective of what does privacy even mean going forward when, everything about if you wear an Apple Watch or another kind of product, they know, your heart rate and whether you're taking enough steps. Gary had talked earlier about your cars knowing, if you're in an accident and your car seat having all this information. In that context, does privacy even have a meaning anymore? And what does that mean then for both companies and consumers that are thinking about these issues and how to put guardrails on them, given all the evolving technology?
It's a great question, and I got to tell you, the future of privacy is so bright, we should all be wearing shades. I'm going to tell you that right now.
That's a good quote.
It's absolutely the truth. And it's a good question about what it means here in the United States, what it means around the world. But I think there's a few core things. The first thing is giving consumers choices is absolutely table stakes for this. When it comes to cars, when it comes to watches, when it comes to all sorts of things, and respecting those choices in a nuanced and sophisticated way as products evolve. As we know, software products are not static. The hardware products we use, whether it's an automobile or whether it's a mobile device or whether it's virtual reality, right? These things are driven by the software, and the functions and the data flows change more quickly than a lot of us appreciate. So giving folks choices and respecting those choices, that's table stakes. But it's not enough, right? We've got to be sensitive about how we set defaults for collection, for use, for data sharing. And there's this increasing notion, and I'm not sure it's the sort of thing that's going to be legislated moving forward, but it certainly is being baked into lots and lots of leading companies' practices about having the best interests of individuals in mind when they interact with those products. And I can say more about what that means at a granular level, but I think that there are product teams, there are lawyers, there are policymakers in the US and all around the world who are trying to figure out how best to be stewards of data when it comes to responsible collection and use.
So where do you see the tensions in sort of, in the best interest of individuals when, for me, I'm using various apps, various products. I'm giving them information because they're trying to tailor certain things to me. Even skincare now, everything is very individualized. So it's supposed to actually make things better, make things more convenient, but then obviously raises, privacy issues. Is there some sort of, the data they're collecting, is that being used for any sort of discriminatory purposes when it comes to skincare products? Just things that you're maybe not thinking of in that moment because you just want to buy it, but then later on it turns into something that you didn't expect it to.
Yeah, so I think you've got a spectrum, right? And at one end of the spectrum are practices that are unlawful today, and the FTC and state attorneys general enforce against, where companies are deceptive or they are unfair in their practices, and they collect data and they use data in ways that don't benefit individuals at all, right? That's at one far end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum is a bunch of practices where data is used to improve the experience for individuals, for other folks on the platform or who use the service, and maybe even for the broader community. And in the middle is a really big gray area, and this is the area that a lot of us live in today, where there's uncertainty about the benefits to the individual versus the benefits to the company. And look, benefits to the company are good things when they align with benefits to the individuals. And figuring out where we are in that gray area is always important. But you raise a good question about the discrimination and about the equity and about the fairness of some of these things. And the truth is that in some circumstances, organizations, whether they're companies or whether they're nonprofits or academic centers or government institutions, need to collect data, sometimes very sensitive data, and they need to use that data, sometimes in very sensitive ways, in order to test for whether or not some of their practices are resulting in biased outcomes, and they need to use that information to try to mitigate some of the risks of bias. And there are privacy-enhancing technologies that can help mitigate some of the risks of that collection you use. But when you think about those socially meritorious sorts of data use, there is a bit of a paradox when it comes to what are the privacy interests here, what does it mean for an organization to be acting in the best interests of individuals who use the product or service, and how do we best mitigate some of these negative downstream effects?
Got it. And Penny, for your organization, some of your companies are more consumer-facing, like Block, which we know as Square with the Cash App and other things. Some are more of the back end of financial sort of plumbing, like Stripe and others. So given the evolution of technology, especially, and we'll talk definitely more about AI with Aaron as well, but with the artificial intelligence boom, how does that affect sort of how your members are thinking about privacy issues, where a lot of that is going to make products and services possibly better, especially for people who don't maybe have access to traditional banks or don't want to have access to traditional banks, but
Sure.
But obviously also presents some risks.
Sure. I would say, in the digital financial service space, we have probably been using AI a lot longer
Yes.
than kind of what is the buzziest right now, and using it for ways in which to be able to spot and to know about fraud prevention, be able to detect patterns in which you are identifying individuals or any bit of nefarious activities or other things, or to actually make and improve the back end better, to be efficient, more effective, to use that personalization that you were talking about as well, to be able to use it in financial services in a way that improves an individual's financial health. So there were a couple of things that we were encouraged about, the fact that the CFPB is now, looks like they're going to be ending and promulgating what they call the open banking rule, which gives consumers the right to permission and have access to their financial data and be able to permission it in a way that best suits their financial life. That is basically a privacy law, one that puts clear roads or clear map as to how to use the data, how it will be permissioned, how you can use it, what are the different aspects of it. So that is a really encouraging thing. And this year the president has done two EOs, one on AI and one just yesterday on data privacy, to encourage his own administration to go throughout all the cabinet and all the different agencies to come up with both AI and privacy. As you heard from the last panel, we all would hope that eventually we get a federal privacy law. 147 bills over 49 states since 2018, that's a lot to have to do with, and so we need the harmonization. But AI can be used in a way, and we have used it, and continue to show responsibility of it in a way that enhances a person's financial health.
And how are your members seeing, you mentioned some of the states and the privacy aspect. The states are also moving forward in terms of their own AI bills. We've seen California put forth a couple comprehensive ones, Connecticut as well. There's a bunch across the country on deepfakes and sort of more specific issues. And then there's the EU AI Act and various other things happening overseas. So how are your members sort of figuring out that landscape, which is newer, and there wasn't the sort of floor on privacy that GDPR put. Everyone's sort of figuring this out now around the same time.
It makes it difficult when you have 50 different states, the District of Columbia and territories all kind of crafting and coming up with their own rules of the road. It makes it very difficult, and so encourage that the White House and others are trying to look at what a federally comprehensive standard floor and ceiling should be on these two key areas, because it shouldn't matter. I mean, we're here in DC. It shouldn't matter if you're taking the 14th Street Bridge to Virginia or the American Legion to Maryland. Your data is transported, and it should be done in the same way with the same privacy rights rules across the geographics. And so that's what we're encouraging, and hope on these larger issues that we can have a national and a federal standard for both.
And Aaron, the Software Alliance has been very heavily involved on the AI front and policy issues. And I promise we will talk about other technology besides AI, but because the Software Alliance has been so involved on that front, how are your members seeing that issue, especially because a lot of them are building sort of the foundation for the tools, but then other companies are building on top of it, fine-tuning these models, tailoring them, and after that, it's sort of not under the purview of, Microsoft OpenAI or other companies like that. It sort of goes off to others. So how are you sort of figuring out where privacy fits when it's that kind of format?
Yes. Thank you. So representing enterprise software companies, they do each of those different steps. Some of them are building foundation models. Some of them are fine-tuning other foundation models. Some of them are deploying them directly or providing services to other companies that are deploying them. And I think what's important is, at the outset, making sure that privacy is protected for a number of reasons, including that it's about customer trust. And if the customers don't trust either that their data is going to be held private and secure, or that the AI is going to be both effective and non-discriminatory, other companies that we provide services to aren't going to adopt them. So for a long time, we've been promoting the use of risk management frameworks for artificial intelligence in order to identify where are the risks going to be in high-risk use cases. If you're providing a loan, if you're deciding on employment or making a medical decision, where are those risks going to be, and how can we mitigate those risks on the front end? There's still also going to be responsibility if there is a discriminatory act and so on. But making sure that as regulation comes online, the EU AI Act, increasingly the number of states that are considering it, it's important that it be focused on high risk, that it be focused on the managing the risks that are presented, so that if I'm using a word processing system that has AI capabilities, the kinds of steps that I should take there are probably different than if I'm making a hiring decision. And that kind of risk-based approach that we see in the EU, that we see coming from the G7, which is important because having consistency across like-minded nations is as important as it is to have all 50 states have one set of rules, both so that companies know how to comply. Gary earlier was talking about the difficulty for small businesses in complying with a range of different laws, and I think that's very true. But also consumers should know what their rights and obligations are.
And what about sort of self-regulation? Because in the absence, especially here, we're seeing, for the elections example, companies coming together, forming alliances to sort of address some of these issues.
Yeah, I think that's a very positive step. I think it's important both as a way of having commitments in place that span between now and when laws come online, whether it's the EU AI Act that will come online but in a few years, or whatever state and federal laws get passed. It's important to have some of those commitments in place. Say from an enterprise software perspective, because our companies are often providing these services to other companies, there's already a built-in expectation that you're going to provide information that demonstrates how the AI system works and that it works fairly and reliably. That's been true in the security space for a long time. It's true for privacy purposes, and it's been true for AI. So those kinds of commitments, some now public, and that's wonderful, but often in just contractual discussions, it's a very important part of it.
Great. And we're almost out of time, but I did promise we will talk about technology beyond AI. So John, I wanted to ask you quickly about augmented reality, virtual reality, extended reality, just a different kind of reality than what we are in currently. How does that technology affect sort of privacy concerns and where that goes, where right now they're kind of more niche products, but if it becomes like a more sort of mass adoption play, does that change things where it's not like gamers and people wanting to do virtual sports and things like that? As that spreads, does that change sort of the privacy landscape?
Yeah, I think it changes a lot. And I think there's a lot of folks who are of the view that augmented reality in particular is going to converge with a lot of the devices, the mobile devices and other sorts of devices that we use every day. And that you can have augmented experiences on your iPhone today, you can have augmented experiences with a headset today, you can have all sorts of different augmented experiences. And setting virtual reality aside for a moment, which sort of closes you off from the world and has deeply immersive experiences, those augmented reality experiences may well be, if these folks are to be believed, they may well be the future of the user interface with services, with data, and yet they require the collection and use of highly sensitive information about our bodies, information about our minds, and the implications, I think, are potentially staggering. The good news is that common sense, straightforward default settings, giving consumers choices, acting in individuals' best interests, can go a long way even when we're in an augmented reality and as we move from the reality today into that world.
Got it. And Penny, I just want to ask you quickly about biometrics and other kinds of, identifiers where obviously like usernames, passwords, like it's kind of passé now. There's, countries like India are focused on digital identities and not having, sort of more traditional routes for that. How are you seeing that kind of technology and the privacy concerns that brings up as well?
I would say we still need to find those rules of the road because we are going into a digital identification world where, I would argue that giving a full 9 of your Social Security isn't the most secure thing to do nowadays. And so being able to use your digital identification, is it a digital ID? Is it a digital driver's license? How is that used? And so still want to, there's still work to be done to ensure that your identification, especially in deep fake worlds and others, that it is who you are, that the systems are in place to be able to ensure that there's not biasness into that identification, but that it is authenticating who you are, and it is used for the purpose in which it does. So looking forward to working with this administration, Congress, and others, because we are and should move into a more secure digital identification or identification system other than, the traditional of writing down a Social Security number that can be stolen and used in other ways. So looking forward to that aspect because it's only going to increase, that use is only going to increase.
Got it. Well, thank you so much for talking about our future. And as John said, it is bright that we have to wear shades, hopefully. So thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for being here.